Everyone needs to sacrifice, she said, her eyes cold as steel, cutting across the glass table like they could slice me in half. Her manicured nails tapped rhythmically on the iPad placed neatly next to the proposal. We're cutting your base salary by 40% and restructuring the entire commission system. I leaned back slightly in my chair, keeping my expression composed, as if what I'd just heard was no more shocking than a suggestion to try the new salad in the cafeteria. Honestly, I had seen it coming, just not announced so brazenly right there in the 17th floor boardroom of the company I had spent nearly 2 decades transforming from a second-rate woodwork shop into a respected name across the American South. My name is Anthony Greaves. I'm 49 years old. 17 years ago, when I first joined Harrow and Blake Furnishings, it was a small regional supplier selling furniture to a few restaurant chains in the Midwest. Now, we had contracts with national brands, an annual revenue exceeding $62 million. Nearly $15 million of that came directly from the clients I had built from scratch. Midnight calls, unscheduled meetups, and handshakes that lasted through winter. And now, I was being pushed out of the game by someone new. Celeste Harlow, with a fake smile and a Valentino suit. She'd arrived just 90 days earlier after the company was acquired by a private equity firm in New York. Harvard MBA, Excel sheets always open, and lips that never mispronounced a single slide. But the one thing she didn't understand: clients aren't data. Your current package no longer aligns with our flexible growth strategy, Celeste said, stressing the word current like I was a fossil of a bygone era. She slid a stack of documents toward me. Everyone's adjusting, you should too. I flipped through the first page. Nearly half my salary gone. Commissions reworked so drastically that even if I doubled my output, I'd barely match last year. Benefits slashed. I wasn't upset about the money. I was disappointed by how they devalued what I had built. I looked up and met her eyes. When does this change take effect? Effective immediately, she answered without hesitation. I closed the folder, stood up, and extended my hand. Thanks for the clarity. She hesitated a beat, then shook it, surprise flashing across her face. What had she expected? A fiery protest? Desperate pleading? No. I brought with me the quiet of someone who knew the execution had been ordered, but still walked away with his head held high. As I exited the room, I saw Celeste watching from behind the executive office window. She didn't know this wasn't the end. In the cardboard box I carried, there wasn't much: a framed photo of me and my son on his graduation day, a personalized pen gifted by a client 6 years ago, and the wooden watch my team gave me on my 15-year anniversary. To Celeste, I was just an expense to be cut. But what she threw away wasn't just a salary, it was an entire network of trust, built around one person. And when that trust leaves, it walks with me. Step by step. No looking back. I left the boardroom as if I had just wrapped up a routine meeting. No outbursts, no sighs, but each step I took was heavier than any high-stakes negotiation I'd ever been part of. The ground floor of Harrow and Blake was usually quiet in the afternoon, but today, every pair of eyes seemed to follow me. Not because I had done anything wrong, but because they saw me. The man they once mentioned in every strategic meeting, the one who stood on stage at year-end celebrations, walking out with a cardboard box through the south elevator. I crossed paths with Brad Simmons on the 8th floor hallway. Brad, our 58-year-old CFO, had been alongside me through nearly 2 decades of the company's ups and downs. We didn't speak, just stood there, 2 men pausing in the hallway, looking at each other. Brad's eyes didn't need words. There was something in them, a blend of sympathy and resignation, that told me more than any financial report ever could. I wasn't being let go because of poor performance. I was being pushed out because I knew too much. I knew every hidden expense line, every clause in major contracts, every reason clients stayed with Harrow and Blake even when the pricing stopped being competitive. Looks like they handed you a velvet knife, Brad said softly, almost in a whisper. I gave a dry laugh. She called it a strategic realignment. Brad raised an eyebrow. Celeste Harlow, I replied, then glanced around. She thinks she's overhauling a startup, not a company built from sweat, grit, and 2 a.m. meetings with clients. Brad gave my shoulder a light squeeze before heading into the conference room. I knew, deep down, he'd started counting his days too. By the time I reached the parking lot, the sun had mellowed. I didn't slam my car door or rev the engine. I simply placed the box on the passenger seat, adjusted the rearview mirror, and looked myself straight in the eye. At 49, I had once imagined retiring at Harrow and Blake. I had turned down 3 tempting offers from major competitors, all for a promise from the company's founder. You'll always have a place here. That founder was now fishing in Florida. And I? Well, I had just been pushed out of the very door I helped build, back when it was nothing but a raw timber frame. 3 hours later, I received a message from Logan Reese, procurement director at Dalton Hospitality Group, one of my biggest clients for over a dozen years. Heard you're out. What the hell's going on at H&B? Before I could even reply, my phone rang. Logan. You already heard about this, I answered the call. Heard it from one of our raw material suppliers. They said Celeste is restructuring the entire client onboarding process. She wants us to re-sign contracts under new terms. Ah, Logan's voice sharpened. We have a 3-year agreement, Anthony. What kind of operation pulls this kind of stunt? I leaned back on the living room sofa. I'm no longer there, Logan. He paused for a few seconds, then spoke slowly. If you land somewhere new, call me before I have to reply to her email again. I hung up. Logan's final words echoed in my head. Before I have to reply to her email again. It wasn't just business anymore, it was a promise. That night, I pulled out an old folder from the drawer, a binder filled with handwritten notes from meetings with my largest clients. Everything I had done, promised, solved. It wasn't just data, it was history. An empire doesn't collapse because of one bad decision. It collapses when leadership forgets what built it in the first place. Celeste might think she saved a few $100,000 a year by cutting me loose, but she had no idea she'd just let $15 million in revenue walk out the door, in the same leather shoes I was still wearing. I still remember the very first day I walked into Harrow and Blake. I was 32 then, starting from zero. No one at the company knew my name, and I had nothing to brag about, except the sweat stains on my back from hauling delivery trucks for my father's wood shop in Missouri. My father, Larry Greaves, ran a small handcrafted furniture shop. As a kid, I spent nearly every summer in that shop, learning how to set a hinge just tight enough, polish a surface until light danced off the grain, and most importantly, how to listen to customers even when they said nothing out loud. I didn't just learn the trade, I learned how to protect my word with both hands. After graduating with a business degree from Oklahoma State, I bounced between a few sales jobs. But nothing felt right until I walked into Harrow and Blake's old office in Wichita Falls. Back then, the company barely cleared $6 million a year, most of it from local restaurant chains and neighborhood churches. I didn't come with a fancy MBA, but I knew every grain of wood. I could tell you the difference between Canadian maple and Georgia oak, and more importantly, I knew when a client actually needed help, not just a revised quote sheet. In my first meeting with the original owner, Preston Harrow, I said one thing: customers aren't buying the table, they're buying the peace of mind that it'll still be standing in their restaurant 20 years from now. Preston sat silently for a moment, then nodded. You're not just selling products, you're selling commitment. And that's how I started, as a regional sales rep covering smaller states like Arkansas and New Mexico. I drove overnight, slept in the back seat, just to show up early for investor meetings. No contract ever came easy. I learned to listen before speaking, remember the name of the purchasing manager's daughter, and call to wish his wife a happy birthday, even if it was just from a calendar note. After 3 years, I was promoted to head of Southwest Sales. Revenue in my region jumped from $2 million to almost $10 million. I didn't use gimmicks or slash prices. I did what my father taught me. Keep your word and do it right. In 2014, I became Director of Business Development. That's when I started building my own team. Young folks, light on experience but heavy on drive. I coached them from the ground up. How to walk through a quote, how to hold steady eye contact when the client asked something tough, By 2022, Harrow and Blake hit 64 million in revenue. Nearly a quarter of that came from accounts I personally handled. Names like Dalton Hospitality, Merritt Casino Group, and Austin Fine Living weren't just clients. They were friends. The kind I helped during the COVID crisis, who I allowed payment extensions for, who I overnighted materials to so they wouldn't have to shut down during a brutal winter. And now, because of a woman from New York who probably couldn't tell mahogany from pine, everything I had built was reduced to 3 lines in a corporate memo. High fixed cost. Outdated management style. Replace with data-driven model. They forgot that spreadsheets don't call a client on New Year's Eve to ask if they need an early shipment. They don't remember that CRMs don't save texts congratulating a partner's son for getting into Stanford. Celeste thought she was restructuring, but in reality, she just ripped out the lifeline of the company. Relationships built on sweat, patience, and decency. And I'm not the kind of man who lets his legacy be buried under a spreadsheet. Not when everything I built is still alive, in each client out there. Everything started to shift shortly after the year-end financial report confirmed the obvious. Harrow and Blake had been officially acquired by Hawthorne Capital, a Manhattan-based private equity firm notorious for buy and strip strategies. People in the industry called them vultures. Swoop in, pick the bones clean, then fly off. Within just 6 weeks, familiar faces began vanishing from the executive floor. Rick Lawson, our longtime VP of manufacturing, the same guy who walked me through the woodshop on day 1, was quietly retired. Diane from legal got reassigned to something called integrated research. Even the assistant who'd been with me for nearly a decade got replaced by an automated scheduling app that sent 3 calendar invites to the wrong day in a row. Celeste Harlow showed up like the first chill of winter. Subtle, but sharp enough to send shivers down the spine of anyone paying attention. She didn't shout, didn't cause a scene. She simply rolled out new policies for performance optimization and financial efficiency. On paper, they sounded reasonable. But when it started taking 3 levels of approval just to expense lunch with a long-term client, you knew something was being torn apart. The client entertainment budget was cut so deeply that the sales team had to pool their own money to keep promises. Those lunches that once reinforced trust after every pricing shift were now replaced with online feedback forms. Clients didn't want data updates. They wanted a handshake, a nod, from someone they trusted, something Celeste couldn't offer. I started noticing meetings I used to lead turned into internal briefings without me. Decisions on major contracts came down from a new strategy team, including 2 of Celeste's former colleagues from her last job in Boston. They didn't understand wood manufacturing, much less why each client had their own pricing structure. One slap in the face came when they quietly reviewed every legacy deal I had spent years putting in place. One day, I got an email from a junior legal assistant. Please provide justification for maintaining the 14% discount for Hillside Build Partners since 2017. That rate no longer reflects current market conditions. I nearly laughed out loud. How was I supposed to explain that discount was what kept Hillside from jumping ship when freight costs doubled during a snowstorm that year? Or the time they needed rush lumber for a school project and I drove the delivery myself? Overnight, what I felt wasn't just insult. It was erasure. A calculated attempt to wipe out everything I stood for. She didn't want to fix anything. She wanted to rebuild from scratch, a system with no room for Anthony Graves or the human connections this company was built on. The peak of it all? I caught a glimpse of Celeste having lunch with Eli, the guy they brought in to replace my former assistant, and Brianna, one of the new team leads from the data before people generation. The 3 of them laughing like they'd run this place forever, while the folks who'd sweated over every contract and relationship were quietly being swept aside. I remember that moment clearly. I stood outside the break room, coffee in hand, cold long before I noticed. She didn't see me, but my eyes didn't leave them. That's when I knew I wasn't being replaced because I wasn't good enough. I was being systematically removed because I stood in the way of turning Harrow and Blake into a soulless money-printing machine. This wasn't just restructuring, they were rewriting history without the people who lived it. And I knew they were making the biggest mistake of their lives. 3 days after that fateful meeting, I got a call from Brent McAllister, the director of financial analysis. His voice was dry, like the PDF attachments in his budget emails. Anthony, can you stop by finance when you're free? We need to reconcile a few travel reimbursements from last year. I didn't ask questions. I didn't have to. In this industry, when finance starts pulling receipts from over 12 months ago, it means one thing. They're building a file on you. Once you're targeted, every meal tab, every expense note, even a holiday wine gift can be twisted into questionable justification. I left finance and stopped by the 6th floor, where Brad Simmons, our CFO, still had the habit of eating lunch in his office instead of joining the new leadership upstairs. I knocked softly. "Come in," Brad's voice called out. He was buried in spreadsheets, but when he saw me, he put the pen down. The door closed behind me. "They've started, haven't they?" he asked. "No small talk needed?" I nodded. "Started with the expenses." Brad sighed, staring at the wall like he was calculating how long he had left before it was his turn. Then he opened a drawer, pulled out a brown envelope, and slid it across the desk. "I can't say this officially, but it's the review list for legacy contracts. Everything signed before Hawthorne took over is being flagged. Yours is marked red." I skimmed through it. Nearly a dozen major accounts I built were listed, with notes suggesting review pricing models, discount structures, and communication protocols. "She's trying to replace me with dashboards and forms," I muttered. Brad stayed quiet for a moment, then said softly, "Anthony, if you walk, they're not just losing a rep. They're losing a network." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. That one sentence told me someone still recognized real value. That afternoon, as I was leaving the parking lot, my phone buzzed. A text from a familiar number. "Anthony, hearing strange things. Everything okay?" It was Martin Layton, CEO of Cobalt Developments, one of Harrow and Blake's top 3 clients over the past decade. I hadn't even started typing when my phone rang. It was Martin. "Anthony, are you still there?" I took a deep breath. "I am, but I don't know for how much longer." Martin was silent for a few seconds. "I just got a call from someone named Mallory. She said she's taking over as point of contact for the Lakehurst project. She even asked about the shipping terms you and I finalized last year." I gripped the steering wheel gently, keeping my voice steady. "I don't know who she is." Martin gave a dry chuckle. "Neither do I. But I know you. You've kept every promise for 9 years. When we were behind schedule because of a material shortage, you personally called the warehouse and bumped our order up. When lumber prices spiked last year, you didn't leave us stranded. So, if you're leaving..." "I haven't left," I cut in, "at least not officially." "Well, if you do, call me first. Don't make me draw straws with the new team." I sat in the car for several minutes after hanging up. Martin's words hit like a mirror. For nearly 2 decades, I thought my value lay in my sales results, in the numbers on quarterly reports. But it didn't. My real value, the part no one could replace, was trust. It was in the kind of relationships no spreadsheet or model could replicate. Celeste might think she just trimmed some bloated cost from the system, but what she pushed out the door was the only thing keeping those clients from walking out too. That night, after the call with Martin, I sat alone in my home office, just the desk lamp on. On the screen was a list of longtime clients' names I didn't need a database for. I remembered their phone numbers, their youngest kid's birthday, their go-to wine at dinner. I opened a new email and typed the recipient, jeremy.fields@hastingsbuild.com. Jeremy Fields, Senior Vice President at Hastings Build Group, an up-and-coming competitor in high-end commercial interiors. We'd crossed paths twice at trade shows in San Diego. He once joked, half serious, "If you ever get tired of being suffocated at Harrow and Blake, give me a call." I kept it short, no fluff. "Hi, Jeremy. If your offer still stands, I'm open to a conversation." I didn't hit send. I saved the draft, then opened a folder labeled Legal on my desktop. I pulled up my employment contract. I wanted to be sure if I left clean. The next morning, I brought the contract to my attorney, Colleen Summers, the same one who handled my equity deal during a 2019 investment. She scanned it quickly, underlined a few lines, then looked up. The non-compete is valid for 6 months, but it only covers engineered wood products and items exclusively made by Harrow and Blake. Meaning, you can work anywhere else as long as you're not selling those specific products. And staying in touch with old clients? They can't stop that. Phone calls, check-ins, even solution advising, it's all perfectly legal. I nodded. The weight lifted a little. Colleen glanced over her half-frame glasses. They're trying to keep clients by intimidation. But loyalty isn't something you can trap in a contract. I went home, reopened the email to Jeremy, and clicked send. 2 hours later, he called. "Anthony, I've been waiting for this call longer than you realize," Jeremy said, upbeat and assured. "I've been tracking your work for years. You're not just a salesperson. You build ecosystems." I didn't flatter back. I simply told the truth. I know what clients need before they know they need it. "Exactly what we're missing," Jeremy replied. "We've got the technical side, but we lack strategic development. I'm ready to create a new role for you. Director of Strategic Partnerships, full authority to build your own team." I didn't accept on the spot. I needed time to wrap things up without leaving a mess. But I knew the game had shifted. Over the next 2 weeks, I quietly untangled myself from Harrow and Blake. I returned the laptop, badge, signed exit papers. I kept my composure, even shook hands with HR, offering a polite smile. Celeste never faced me. She handed logistics off to Mallory, the same one who couldn't hold eye contact with me once during her short tenure. Once again, they chose avoidance over accountability. I called each major client, not to poach, but to say goodbye like any decent man would. No promises, no mention of competitors. Just this: "I've left Hera and Blake. If you ever need anything, you know how to find me." The reactions were nearly identical. Surprise, silence, then a quiet, "You're the reason we stayed all these years." I didn't have to do anything else. In their eyes, I hadn't left. I'd just taken up position somewhere else. Without the old nameplate, but still the same man they trusted. Like the old carpenter I used to follow my father always said after finishing a table, "Just because it's built doesn't mean it's done. That when it starts living." I just left the old place, but what I'd built over nearly 2 decades was still alive, waiting for me to write its next chapter. Less than 2 weeks after I officially left Harrow and Blake, the phone started ringing at an odd pace. Not from recruiters, but from people who had once shaken my hand across hundreds of contracts. They didn't ask where I was. They asked only one thing: "Can you still help me?" The first call came from Kent Holliday, construction director at Redwood Atelier. His voice was full of frustration. "Anthony, I just got a price increase notice from H&B. Nearly 11%, no warning." I called support and they said it's all being realigned with market standards. No one there seems to actually know what's going on. I stayed calm. "I get it, Kent. What do you need from me?" He didn't hesitate. "If you've got another supply option, I'm ready to switch. I'm not looking for cheap, just to be treated like a partner, not a line on a spreadsheet." 2 days later, I got an email from Sharon Vargas, senior manager at Lennox Build and Design. The subject: "Can we meet?" The message was short. "I don't want to keep working with people who don't understand what keeps relationships going." I didn't have to convince anyone. They were finding me. I updated Jeremy Fields at Hastings Build Group. He gave me full authority to create a new division, Strategic Client Services, focused solely on onboarding and supporting every client I had ever worked with. No pushing, no chasing. Just doing exactly what I'd done for the last 17 years. I brought in 3 young colleagues who had left H&B before I did, people who understood my philosophy and were ready to build again. We didn't rent conference rooms or launch ad campaigns. I drove to job sites, inspected deliveries, called to confirm timelines, and asked managers if installers actually showed up on time. In just the first month, we won back 3 contracts from Harrow and Blake worth nearly $3.6 million combined. But more important was the word spreading among industry folks. One evening, while dining at a Mexican restaurant in San Antonio with a longtime client, I overheard a voice at the next table. Word is, Anthony Greaves is with Hastings now. If that's true, that's where we're signing next. I didn't turn around, didn't interrupt, I just smiled. The dominoes were starting to fall. 3 weeks later, Celeste emailed, cold and calculated, just like her. I'd like to meet regarding your outreach to former Harrow and Blake clients. Please respond promptly. I didn't reply. 3 days later, my phone rang. Anthony, this is Celeste Harlow. I know, I answered calmly. We need to talk. I don't think there's anything left to say, Celeste. Her tone softened. I don't want to escalate this. If you agree to stop engaging those clients, we can explore more flexible terms around your non-compete. I chuckled. I've never reached out to anyone. They came to me, and according to my lawyer, I haven't broken a single clause. Anthony, she nearly hissed, you're doing serious damage to your former company. I paused, then replied, No, Celeste, you did that. I'm just the consequence. I ended the call. Outside, a light rain fell. I sat by the window, sipping warm coffee, feeling, for the first time in months, that I was doing exactly what I should. Not retaliating, not fighting anyone, just rebuilding from what I had planted. One morning in early June, I walked into my office at Hastings and saw a white envelope on the desk. No name, no note. Inside was a copy of a nationwide supply contract from Treadstone Developments, a real estate firm with dozens of projects across the South. Signed with me as Director of Strategic Partnerships. Value $4.8 million over 24 months. The short note said, I never thought I'd leave Harrow and Blake. But you don't belong to a company, you belong to people. And I want a real person doing real work. Signed, Joel Kincaid, VP of Treadstone. The counterattack had taken shape. That very afternoon, trade media took notice. A headline in American Contracting Weekly read, H&B's market share crumbles after Anthony Greaves joins Hastings Build Group. The article detailed how renewal rates had dropped from 86% to under 60% in the latest quarter, calling it a ripple effect triggered by the mishandling of one key executive. I stayed silent. No interviews, no statements. I let the numbers speak for themselves. The following week, as I was reviewing new hire training plans, I received an email from a name I didn't expect. Mallory Trent. The very person Celeste had chosen to replace me. The subject line, regarding a possible future collaboration. I read every word. She wrote about reconsidering her career direction and wanting to learn in a people-first environment, not a data-first one. I didn't reply right away. I had no grudge against Mallory, but I hadn't forgotten her silence while I was being pushed out. 3 days later, another piece of news spread through the industry. Celeste Harlow had been demoted, reassigned to a vague strategic development role with unclear authority. She was replaced by a longtime internal leader, someone who had once opposed the overly aggressive restructuring of the sales division. An old colleague from H&B texted me, she doesn't stand at the front of the boardroom anymore. Now she sits in a back office, no name, no sign on the door. I didn't feel happy, I didn't feel smug, just strange. Someone who once boasted about operational efficiency had become living proof of strategic failure. They didn't understand that revenue doesn't last when you lose the one thing that matters most, trust. On Monday morning, I was invited to attend the Southwest Construction Conference in Dallas. No speeches, no spotlight, just a networking reception with a few old partners and many folks from the field. As I walked into the main hall, heads turned almost instantly. A man approached and handed me a business card. I'm Trevor Vaughn from Keystone Manufacturing. You're Anthony Greaves, right? I nodded. He smiled. I've never worked with you, but I've heard enough to know who keeps clients steady when everything else falls apart. I just smiled and took the card. That afternoon, I received an anonymous message through my company email. No subject line, no explanation, just a screenshot from an internal H&B forum. A staff member had written, "Crazy to realize we had an entire stable system because of one guy, and they fired him for being too traditional." I saved the image, not to show off, but as a reminder. I had been right not to respond with anger. I responded with results. By the end of that month, Hastings Build Group officially announced a new contract worth nearly $6 million with 3 major contractors, 2 of whom had once been core clients at Harrow and Blake. Trade media began calling it the Anthony effect. I quietly continued the work, no interviews, no press quotes, but I knew one thing for certain: I didn't need to say anything. The whole industry was saying it for me, all because of one simple thing: I kept my word and they lost theirs. It was exactly 1 year after I left Harrow and Blake. The 15th floor conference room at Hastings was filled with the clinking of glasses. On the big screen, the revenue chart lit up like fireworks at the end of a festival. $27.4 million, exceeding first-year targets by nearly 40%. The department I had founded, Strategic Partnerships and Client Development, was no longer a pilot program. It was now a core division. Of the current client list, 8 out of 10 of my former top accounts had officially transitioned to exclusive partnerships with Hastings. Not because of flashy ads, not because of price cuts, just because they knew I was still here. Picking up calls at 7 p.m. on a Saturday, showing up to job sites if a final material check was needed. We weren't selling furniture, we were selling promises kept. I stood at the back of the room, soda in hand, watching the young team I had handpicked one by one. The faces that once struggled with Excel spreadsheets were now negotiating multi-million-dollar deals. The ones who once stared at pricing charts now held eye contact with clients during tough conversations. Jeremy Fields, the one who first believed in me when I was tossed aside, walked over. "Not bad for a guy who got labeled too traditional, huh?" he said with a grin. I shrugged. Honestly, not much has changed. We're just doing what everyone knows but few actually do, treating clients like people. A chime rang at the front desk. The receptionist handed me a business card sealed in an envelope. I took it and read the embossed name, instantly familiar. Celeste Harlow, Hamilton Strategy Group Senior Consultant. Below, in handwritten ink, "If you have time, I'd love to reconnect. This time to learn, not to lead." I wasn't surprised. In this industry, word spreads faster than press releases. She finally realized what she had lost, and now she was trying to understand why. The next morning, I sat back down at my desk and placed her card in the top drawer. Not to call. Just to glance at it one last time before dropping it into the keepsake box. Next to an old client's handwritten letter, a few scribbled thank you notes from teammates, and the wooden pen my old crew gave me on my last day at H&B. A week later, I was invited to speak at a national summit on client growth strategy. The proposed topic: how to build loyalty without binding contracts. I accepted, but when they asked if I'd be bringing a slideshow, I shook my head. "Just the story," I said. On stage, I didn't share theories or statistics. I told a story. From a kid who knew every grain of wood by his teens, to a man pushed out of the company he helped build, to someone who stepped into a new place and built again. From timeless principles that never age. At the end, I spoke slowly. I don't build furniture anymore. Now I build principles I believe in. Keep your word. Do good work. Value relationships more than profits. Wood may decay with time, but trust never does. The room erupted in applause. But I knew the real meaning wasn't in the clapping. It was in the eyes of those sitting there. People beginning to think differently, not just about revenue, but about what truly makes a business last. As I left the hall, my phone buzzed again. Another old client was calling, the one I'd once helped rush a delivery on Christmas Eve. I smiled. "Hey, I still remember you needed that special veneer for the New Mexico project. How can I help?" I was still me. Still without a fancy title. Just doing what I believe in. And this time, I wasn't doing it alone. Anthony's story isn't just about reclaiming a role. It's living proof of a simple truth. Real value doesn't lie in titles or data. It lives in trust built over time. When labeled obsolete, he didn't respond with anger. He rebuilt from what couldn't be duplicated: genuine relationships, kept promises, and quiet integrity. In a world obsessed with performance, it's people like Anthony who make a business truly endure. What do you think of Anthony's choices and the way he handled it all? Does kindness still hold weight in today's cutthroat market? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more meaningful stories about family and life.